Despite the common belief that the Bengals are one of the worst franchises in the history of the NFL, they were at one point a force to be reckoned with in the AFC during the early portion of their existence. After Paul Brown helped form the team, they helped reinvent the modern offense, with early traces of the no-huddle and West Coast offense being used under Bill Walsh, forcing teams to adapt and resulting in the zone blitz. Believe it or not, they actually made 2 Super Bowl appearances, only to be thwarted by the former coach of theirs, Bill Walsh. Walsh, who lobbied for the Cincinnati head coaching job, was not given the job, and instead, the Bengals hired Sam Wyche. Quarterbacks Ken Anderson and Boomer Esiason led the team to the championship game in 1981 and 82, and the 1988-89 seasons, respectively. But unfortunately for them, they just bumped into the dynasty of their time period. But now, they are looked down upon across the league, as they have not won a playoff game since 1991, have continued to disappoint year after year, and they don't even have an indoor practice facility. Today, we're going to look into the downfall of the Cincinnati Bengals and what exactly went wrong over the last 30 years. So let's get into it. As sad as it may be, the transition into the dark ages for the Bengals began when owner Paul Brown passed away in 1991 and ownership transferred to his son and current owner, Mike Brown. Brown has also acted as the general manager of the team from this point forward and made some famously bad draft picks to begin his time as GM, such as David Klingler, the 6th overall pick in 1992, Dan Wilkinson, the 1st pick in 94, Kajana Carter, the 1st overall pick in 1995, and Achilles Smith, 3rd overall pick in 99, were all supposed saviors that never totally panned out in the league. These busts were taken over future stars such as Marshall Faulk, Willie McGinnis, Tony Baselli, Steve McNair, Warren Sapp, Ed Green James, Ricky Williams, Torrey Holt, and Champ Bailey. As you can tell based on these picks, the Bengals were not very good in the 90s. The year they took Achilles Smith in 1999, they had an offer from the Saints which included their entire draft in 1999, along with 2 additional firsts and another additional 2nd round pick. Achilles Smith made just 17 career starts in 4 seasons with Cincinnati, throwing 5 touchdowns and 13 interceptions. Looks like they regret turning down that deal. In the 90s, the Bengals went 52-117 and had just 1 winning record and 1 playoff appearance in this time. And to this day, Cincinnati has not won a playoff game under Mike Brown's ownership. The Bengals had some more draft success to start the 2000s, picking up future Pro Bowlers Justin Smith and Chad Ochocinco.
There's 3 things in life that's certain: death, taxes, and 85 will always be open.
The 2001 draft. But in 2003, the Bengals seemed to find their savior, kinda, by drafting Heisman-winning USC quarterback Carson Palmer. This was also the year they hired Marvin Lewis, who brought more stability into the organization. Carson Palmer, Rudy Johnson, Chad Johnson, and TJ Houshmandzadeh made for an above-average offensive unit. Chad Johnson became the first Bengals receiver to lead the NFL in receiving yards, and was entertaining to watch week in and week out, even breaking the team's receiving yards and receptions record by 2007. He was undoubtedly among the best receivers in the league at this time, and really brought a spark to this organization that had been dead for nearly 15 years. In 2005, the Bengals clinched their first AFC North title and their first playoff appearance in 15 years, a momentous occasion. Carson Palmer tossed a franchise record with 32 touchdown passes in a single season. In classic Bengals fashion, they lost to the Steelers in the first playoff game at Paul Brown Stadium. This loss was headlined by fights and injuries on offense, as Carson Palmer went down on the 2nd play from scrimmage after taking a low blow and tearing his ACL, along with Chris Henry injuring up his knee on that same play, ruining the Bengals' opportunity to win their first playoff game in 15 years. The Bengals went on a downward slope after their playoff appearance. It seemed like the Bengals were on their way out of the basement, but the Bengals returned to their endless cycle of mediocrity. In 2006, the Bengals started the year 8-5 and looked to be in prime position to make the playoffs. However, they lost their final 3 games that year, including a 24-23 loss to the Broncos, where Shane Graham missed an extra point with 41 seconds left that would have tied the game, as well as a 23-17 overtime loss to their division rival, the Pittsburgh Steelers, in Week 17. I didn't really know where to include this in the video because it's more of a recurring problem than anything to do with one season, but this 2006 Bengals team was really a wild one. It's no secret the Bengals have a history of dirty players and criminals on their roster, and perhaps their culture is to blame for this endless cycle of mediocrity, at least partially. But I think this 2006 Bengals team shows it pretty well. There were 8 different players that were either arrested or suspended for something they did off the field, some several times. Offenses vary from burglary to drunk driving to drug possession to spousal abuse. The list goes on. It's not like the Bengals learned from this either. They continued to bring in players with troubled past and character concerns. They'd go on to later bring in Adam Pac-Man Jones and Joe Mixon, among others. Even players who never did anything legally wrong were still bad for the culture. Guys like Vontaze Burfict, who was notorious for many dirty hits in his time in Cincinnati, earned several suspensions. Chad Ochocinco, despite how talented he was constantly getting fined by the league for stunts he pulled. I could go on. No, really, I could. I just wanted to make known how awful the culture of the Bengals is and how that contributed to the downfall of this organization. Anyways, let's just move on from this and move on to the following season. In 2007, the Bengals started the year 2-6, and despite rallying in their final 8 games to finish 7-9, it was too little too late. In 2008, Carson Palmer suffered an elbow sprain, which eventually led to torn ligaments in the elbow that ended his season with the Bengals and forced Ryan Fitzpatrick to step in for the remainder of the season. Palmer returned in 2009, and the Bengals went on a tear, starting the year 9-3. Controversy always seems to follow this Bengals team, though. Chad Ochocinco was fined twice in 3 weeks for a celebration and joking about bribing the ref. But spirits were still high and the Bengals team looked poised to make a run. However, following a Week 14 blowout loss to the Vikings, tragedy struck the Bengals as wide receiver Chris Henry fell out of a pickup truck during an argument with his fiancée at the time and passed away due to his injuries. As you can imagine, players were distraught about losing a friend and a teammate, and the Bengals never seemed to recover. After losing to the Jets 37-0 in Week 17, they had to face them the following week in the wild card round, a game in which they lost. For those of you keeping score at home, this is the Bengals' second playoff appearance under Mike Brown's ownership and 0 playoff wins since 1991. After signing Terrell Owens on a 1-year deal for the 2010 season to pair alongside Chad Johnson, the team was making one final push in the Carson Palmer era, and despite starting 2-1, they lost the 10 straight games and finished 4-12, earning them the 4th overall pick. With the 4th overall pick in 2011, the Bengals began a new era with the offensive unit by taking stud Georgia standout AJ Green, along with Andy Dalton in the 2nd round, preparing for the inevitable exit of Carson Palmer. Despite initially refusing to, Mike Brown was forced to trade Palmer as he held out and even threatened retirement. Palmer was shipped off to the Raiders for 2 first-round picks. This same offseason, Chad Ochocinco was sent to New England for a 5th and a 6th rounder, marking the end of an era in Cincinnati. Without these two, the Bengals finished 9-7 and surprisingly made the playoffs, where they lost to the Houston Texans. Not only did AJ Green and Andy Dalton have a dynamic duo on the field, they brought a winning culture, at least in the regular season. The Bengals made 5 straight playoff appearances with Marvin Lewis and Dalton at the helm. These 5 straight playoff appearances include back-to-back losses to the Texans, an upset win by the Chargers, and a loss to the Colts. In between the second Texans loss and a Chargers loss, Marvin Lewis took over much control from an aging Mike Brown. But 2015 was their best shot at winning the big game, as they started 8-0 and were clicking on all cylinders. Andy Dalton, Jeremy Hill, Giovanni Bernard, AJ Green, Mohamed Sanu, Marvin Jones, and Tyler Eifert made for a dynamic offense with a great offensive line. Hill and Bernard made for a thunder and lightning type of backfield, as each back ran for 700 plus yards and combined for 14 scrimmage touchdowns. AJ Green put up a 1,000 yard and 10 touchdown season, and Marvin Jones accounted for 800 yards and 4 touchdowns. Tyler Eifert emerged onto the scene as a red zone machine, catching 13 touchdowns. This defense was hard-hitting and filled with studs like Geno Atkins, Carlos Dunlap, AJ Hawk, Vontaze Burfict, Pac-Man Jones, and Reggie Nelson. However, the heart and soul of this team, Andy Dalton, suffered a devastating broken thumb in Week 14 that sat him out for the remainder of the season. A.J. McCarron stepped in and the Bengals finished 12-4, ready to face the Steelers in the AFC wildcard round. As expected, Andy Dalton being out, the defense would be forced to carry the load in the playoff game. They did just that, but they received no help from their offense. In a very low-scoring game and boring half, Pittsburgh led 6-0 entering the locker room. It was more of the same for the Bengals coming out of the locker room. A.J. McCarron fumbled on the first drive. The Steelers would go on to rule the third quarter and would take a commanding 15-0 lead. Then, early in the fourth quarter, A.J. McCarron throws a bomb to A.J. Green and pass interference is called. This turns the tide as Jeremy Hill scores a touchdown on the drive. The Bengals were down 15-10 with just under 2 minutes to go when A.J. Green scored a touchdown to take the lead, putting Cincy up 16-15. Then, one of the strangest sequences happened. On the first play of the next possession, Landry Jones, filling in for Big Ben, who got knocked out late in the third from a big sack from Vontaze Burfict, threw an interception to no other than Vontaze Burfict. Then, on just one play later, Jeremy Hill, who is running out the clock, coughs up the ball and the Steelers get one more chance. Big Ben came back into the game. The Steelers would have a way to go to get into field goal range and had less than 90 seconds to do so. The Steelers crossed midfield with about 20 seconds left. Big Ben throws a pass to Antonio Brown, who gets hit very dirty by, yup, you guessed it, Vontaze Burfict. This hit concussed AB. Unsportsmanlike conduct is called, bringing the Steelers into field goal range. Of course, an argument between both teams followed, and Adam Jones committed a personal foul after shoving Pittsburgh assistant Joey Porter and cursing out referees. This gifted the Steelers 33 yards total and an easy game-winning field goal for Boswell. This is the pinnacle of everything Bengals. Bad culture, bad play, everything, all around. This right here just defines the Bengals over the last 30 years. During these first 5 years of the Dalton era, the Bengals amassed a 40-27-1 record. However, the Bengals would fail to reach the playoffs in all the years following the season. Over the next few years, the offensive line would fall apart and injuries and age began to catch up with A.J. Green. Just 2 years following their last playoff appearance, the Bengals had the lowest total yards in the league. The closest they got to making the playoffs was in 2018, when they started off 5-3 and were in position to make the postseason, but before ultimately finishing 6-10 as a result of injuries to both A.J. Green and Andy Dalton. This was the end of the Marvin Lewis era in Cincinnati, as they just felt that it was time to move on and begin a new chapter. He was there for nearly 20 years and they didn't win a single playoff game in that time. And they went to the playoffs like 7 times. So, overall, that's kind of a failure. In 2019, under new head coach Zach Taylor, the Bengals started the season 0-11 before finishing 2-14, getting them the first overall pick in the draft, which turned into Joe Burrow. To make matters worse for the Bengals, the rookie quarterback had a promising start to the season before tearing his ACL in Week 11. Sitting with the 5th pick in this year's draft, the Bengals have the opportunity to return to glory days if they can hit on their first few draft picks. Their priorities in the coming years should include protecting Joe Burrow and maybe getting an indoor practice facility. Just an idea. Unlike past years, the Bengals have finally committed to winning by spending in free agency. They have invested in their defense by bringing in guys like DJ Reader, Trey Hendrickson, Chidobe Awuzie, Von Bell, and Mike Hilton over the past 2 offseasons. If the Bengals can commit to this core of guys they have, things may start looking up for them. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows. The Bengals have a massive culture problem, and that's a big reason why they've struggled over the past 30 years. That's going to have to get fixed. But the talent and the pieces are starting to come together. We mentioned the defense already, but Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, Joe Mixon, and Tyler Boyd on the offense is a pretty nasty group of weapons. Now they just have to worry about fixing the offensive line, and the Bengals may be in pretty good shape in the future. Joe Burrow's really talented. We believe in him. But with all that being said, that does it for today's video. We hope you enjoyed this type of video. We want to do more like this. We have 2 prior ones we did. One about the Washington football team and one about the New York Knicks. So if you're interested in that, a playlist to that will be linked to this video. This was honestly a really fun video to make. So again, we really appreciate it if you guys would just hit the subscribe button, drop a like, share with a friend, and comment down below what would you like to see us do in the future. We'd love to hear what you guys have to say. But we're done for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you next time. Peace.